Hi, welcome. Good evening, welcome to tonight's pre-concert talk. I'm Brandi Parisi, the midday host for All Classical Portland. We're going to be joined by Carlos Kalmar in a little while, but right now I am so honored to introduce to you Johannes Moser, the Oregon Symphony's artist in residence for the next 3 seasons.
Thank you.
Now, I was fortunate enough to have a lot of time talking with Johannes on Thursday, when he came by the All Classical Studios for Thursdays at 3. But I want to start by just talking with you about what the artist in residence does. Yes, obviously you perform, and you've performed several times already with the Oregon Symphony, but there's a lot of outreach involved also, and you've already begun that part of this role.
Well, I guess the artist in residence does what I want him to do, which is a very lucky position. Whenever I plan a residency with an orchestra, I try to sort of really tailor-make the activity to the place and what they offer, what they want, and also what I'm passionate about. Certainly outreach is a big part of that. I've been fortunate that I've been to Portland a couple of times, so I kind of have a feel for the city already. But just to give you some examples, when I was in Frankfurt, I knew that there were a lot of amateur musicians, so we did a project with amateur cellists. And now I have a residency in Berlin where, I've studied and I've played a lot in hospitals and hospices and in different institutions, so we're going to continue doing that. And now here, of course, with a lot of homeless on the street, that is a big part of our work. But also working with children. Yesterday I visited the Bravo Youth Orchestra, which was delightful. And so I think every residency is different, and that's what makes it exciting, and that's what makes it challenging. And at the end of the day, it is important to me that an organization, also the city where it's happening, really feels that this is a residency for them, and this is not just a cookie cutter thing that we apply, sort of general. And this is the only residency I have that lasts 3 years. I hope that by year 2 we're not out of ideas, but the way things are going, I'm very optimistic that there is always going to be something new, because the Oregon Symphony already is doing so many things in the community, and I know very few orchestras that are so engaged and so passionate about reaching out to audiences of all kind, and that's really wonderful.
You and I were talking on Thursday. I want to talk about one more specific outreach that you've been involved in just this week, and that's with St. Mary's, because I found it very inspiring. Can you talk a little bit about what you were just involved in this week with that organization?
Yeah, so St. Mary's is an institution, if you don't know, for young boys between the age of 11 and 18 that really had a very tough life, a very hard upbringing, and sort of instead of going to a correctional facility, I guess they go there to straighten themselves out and to get back on track with life. And going to these kind of things, no offense, but it's much more challenging and exciting than to play a concert, because you have no idea what is going to come your way. At least here we have a certain way of doing things, right? There's applause, then you play a little bit, then there's another applause, and you're done. Usually, sometimes tomatoes fly, but seldom. But with these kind of things, you just don't know what is going to happen. And it was beyond expectation wonderful, because hi, how are you? Yeah, who's this guy? Security, please. Fantastic shirt. Who are you? We'll see. We'll see later. So anyways, the conversations that this visit was creating, and also the openness to talk about emotion and to talk about music and all these kind of things, was something that I did not expect. I mean, especially, you know, from teenagers. I mean, when I was a teenager, the last thing I wanted to talk about was my feelings. And so I think that this visit through music really gave us a platform to communicate in a meaningful way. And I think probably the word meaningful is what we're going for in this residency. It's not that you have a ton of activity and a lot of, you know, woo-ha and a lot of Facebook posts and all that, but you actually try to aim for something that is meaningful on a personal basis, and that everybody leaves enriched.
Very good. Well, outreach with music and music. Tonight you're performing the Shostakovich First Cello Concerto, a devil of a concerto, very difficult, but also some really...
You're making me slightly nervous. What did I miss so far?
But some really interesting elements in this as well, including a Georgian folk song that was included toward the end with some political overtones to it as well. But what this is really known for is how hard it is.
Well, yeah, when you learn it. I mean, of course, there is challenges, but I wouldn't say that this is sort of how I go into the concert and saying I have to climb Kilimanjaro now without any oxygen, you know, or something like that. I mean, yes, there are challenges, but these challenges are, with any good piece, challenges are made to enhance the artistic expression. Yeah, if there is just difficulty for the sake of difficulty, like I find in some of my commissions. I mean, I commission a lot of new concertos, and sometimes, you know, a composer will say, "Well, in order for it to be attractive, I made it very difficult." And I say, "Thank you very much. Like, my day only has 24 hours. What else you got?" You know. So I think if you find that the difficulty and the strain that it puts on you actually gives birth to an emotional quality, then I think difficulty is justified. Now, this piece was written in 1959, so 6 years after Stalin's death, and Shostakovich felt kind of ready to ridicule Stalin. And it was still very dangerous at the time, but he took Stalin's favorite song, a song called Sulliko, and he incorporated in a very sort of disguised way into the last movement. And another thing that people often mistake is that they think that the first theme, which is comprised of 4 notes, actually is related to what he liked to use, his initials, DSCH. Actually, that is not the case. This first theme comes from an old film score of his called, the film was called The Young Guard. There was a time in Shostakovich's life when he was not allowed to write music, but film music was okay, so he wrote this film score. And it's a very eerie theme. It's played, you know, maybe 5 times slower than what you hear in the concerto. But basically what this theme is, you have if you want to know, is an F-flat major against an E-flat major chord, and that's it. So there is no DSCH coding in there, which of course everybody would be hoping for, because that would make this piece extra personal, you know, for him. But he wrote this piece for the superstar of the time, you could argue the superstar of cello of the 20th century, for Mstislav Rostropovich, and yeah, Rostropovich learned it in 3 days, as he did with these things, and the lucky thing is that he overlooked a couple of things. And so, although of course his recording remains, and his opinion of this concerto remains one of the cornerstones of interpretation, when you look closely to the music, as we have done this week, you will find tempo relations that are actually incredibly exciting, and when done correctly, are hair-raisingly interesting and difficult, I would say. There we have difficulty that actually contributes to emotional excitement. I think you would agree, probably. No?
Well, this is same as Johannes. I have conducted this piece a couple of times, and of course, when you are a conductor, you always try to be a servant of the cellist you are accompanying, And I would say this is the first time that, especially in the third movement, we do the tempo relationships the way they are actually in the score. Because, you know, sometimes in a score, and not only in this one, you will find things and think, that is literally impossible to do, what the composer wants, because one thing might be so incredibly fast that it's barely playable, and the other might be... Anyway, in any case, in this, it made a lot of sense when we talked about it and when we worked on it, that it gives the last movement kind of a unity that it otherwise wouldn't have. In other things, in other interpretations, the last movement, I would say, is essentially three kind of independent little segments, and that's it. But if you actually are very, if you observe the letter of the law, as we call the score, very thoroughly, then it makes a lot of sense. And it also makes a lot of sense to, in the big scope of things of this concerto. So this is the first of two concerti that he wrote. And this is, I always like to say, and Johannes will later beat me up behind, say, this is the lighter one of the two. And if you think that I really say this is the lighter one, just please come to see the second if you really want to have a depression one day. Because, so one thing I want to mention is, and I think we have an insert in the program books, that we altered for technical reasons the order of the program slightly. So the funny thing is that you are going to hear in the second half of the concert an overture by Rossini, which has this lightness, and then this Shostakovich concerto starts kind of where Rossini left it, just there are 100 and God knows how many years in between, but you think kind of same thing, but just you wait. It's not what it seems. And the sheer, in part, brutality and anguish that exists in the first movement alone, and the abruptness of some musical ideas is incredible. And then comes the second and also the third movement. The third movement, Johannes plays it alone, and the second movement is one of those, you know, I always feel like that with music of Shostakovich, that he has this quality of, you are, which might be because I know Shostakovich is Russian, when you are actually being sent to Siberia and it's 20 degrees below.
On a summer day.
On a summer day. And you are absolutely alone and there is nobody there and absolutely nothing that makes life pleasant. That is a little bit the sense I get of the second movement in part. There is also some warmer episodes and there is drama, but that is, and then you need to, with the fourth movement, you need to bring everything to a close. And the disparity of the last movement when it gets purposefully hectic is unbelievable until we get to this very famous tempo relationship at the end where you essentially you come back to the beginning of the first theme of this concerto. It just sounds very different. And Johannes will be obsessing on octaves like...
Well, let's not forget though that the way we get from Siberia to obsessive is through the cadenza. Yeah, the third movement, which I'm playing by myself. Usually a cadenza is, you know, between 30 seconds and 1.5 minutes, or depending on the ego of the soloist, maybe can last even a little bit longer. But this is a written out cadenza by Shostakovich, which is, I think, 6.5 minutes. And it's the most incredible monologue, I would say, going really from zero, which is where we end in the second movement, to a very personal and very terrible outcry. And then the protagonist, let's call that solo cello that, really goes insane, basically. And through that comes this, I call it the first of all, of course, the theme of Suliko, but then the Kazakhstan dance. And it is really going from complete solitude to going absolutely, pardon my French, batshit crazy. So this journey, and I play this concerto a lot, and I've played it since I'm a teenager, this journey really grabs me every time. And I think that is really the sign of fantastic music, is that it just doesn't wear off, and it doesn't become stale. And we'll do everything tonight for it to become very alive, I would say.
As Carlos mentioned, there's been something of a change-up in the lineup in the program. The second half will be the concerto, bookended with Rossini and the Russian Easter Festival Overture. But the first piece on tonight's program is by far the least heard, least performed. Bernd Zimmerman. On the face of it, this piece looks like a musical mosaic. Lots of familiar tunes, lots of familiar pieces, melodies that you'll recognize, but there's a lot more going on in this piece.
Well, the only sad thing about reordering for the program is it would have been so nice to actually come out at the concert, and especially on Saturdays when I talk to everybody here, beginning of the concert, to say it's so wonderful because we are going to play a little overture by Rossini, which is what you expect from Rossini. Very pleasant, very light, very fun, wonderful. And then Bernd Alois Zimmerman will destroy everything you think about classical music. All of it, just no, don't think about that. It's very different. So what is this piece? It's a collage. The piece is based on a play of theater that caused a humongous scandal when it was premiered, and from what I remember, it was premiered and then it was cancelled immediately. It had one show back in the days, and the piece is called Le Roi Ubu, the King Ubu, by Alfred Jarry. And Alfred Jarry is linked to postmodernism, Dadaism, Surrealism, and all that kind of stuff. And he also has, Jarry has a very deep affection for the completely absurd. So everything you think that in theater would work, in Jarry's work, it's not there. And things don't line up the way they are supposed to be. And now Bernd Alois Zimmerman, who was a very versatile composer, just wrote the music for the dinner of this king. And it's 8 movements. And the movements don't make really sense, but they make a lot of sense. And they are related loosely to what the play tells you, not in terms of the plot, but what the play actually wants to do, which is mocking the bourgeoisie, mocking essentially the middle class and the cultural approach of middle class. And he wrote it for a specific occasion, and he wanted kind of the intellectual people of the city where it was premiered in Germany to appear there. And then with the music and other things that will happen also tonight, he wanted to mock them, and it all ends with the brainwashing march at the end, which essentially is a lot of noise, nothing else, in which the intellectuals are being deposed through a trapdoor. So additionally to that, it was Bernd Alois Zimmerman's intention that every time this piece is being played in a concert, there has to be either an actor or a comedian, male or female, doesn't matter, on stage. And he said it would be nice if this person impersonates Alfred Jarry and comes on stage on a bicycle and always gives an introduction of let's say 45 seconds, give or take, and the introduction has to do not with the music, it has something to do with the political and cultural situation of the city in which the piece is being played. Brace yourselves. Now, the good thing is I told our comedian, Jason Trieger, please don't do that. I told him to think a little broader than Portland or even Oregon. Just go wherever. And I told him, if you want to do an intro that is absurd, just go. It's the freedom in a way in this piece is amazing. And then comes the music. And yes, you can sit in your chairs and try to find the pieces that are being quoted, but some of the quotations are really difficult to hear, because I give you one of the completely insane examples. The reason why we reassembled the program has something to do with logistics. This setting you see is the setting for the Zimmerman, and so the stage is full of wind players, quite percussion, guitar, mandolin, harp, cellist, etc. And there are only 4 string players, and they are all over there, and there are 4 bass players. And the 4 bass players also play something, a pavan at some point that sounds amazing, and it's so high-pitched that you think it's completely absurd that they play that. Well, that's what Zimmerman wanted. And yeah, there you have it. We are going to destroy what you think about music.
Well, and it sounds like the spoken word part will be at least slightly different for every performance also. That it's not quite like improv, but not dissimilar from improv also.
Well, there might be some improv coming from Jason. I don't know whether he writes everything in stone, and he might change his mind in terms of the second and third concert. The music itself is written out meticulously. It just sounds very strange, but it's very well put together. I mean, it's really, I would say, sometimes to do something like that, you have to be very intelligent. And this is intelligent, absurd, nonsensical music. And trust me, at the end, in the last kind of movement before this brainwashing march, that's the movement where you have the most recognition. It starts very like, what? And then you will like, oh yeah. And then comes another like, oh yeah. And then the rest is very noisy. Just wait.
This is kind of a musical whiplash concert, from the Zimmerman to the Rossini to the Shostakovich, and then finishing with a favorite, a crowd pleaser, and the Russian Easter Festival Overture. Now, I'll confess, I was talking with my husband this evening about this. He's a tuba player, and he was saying this is one of the biggest high-wire acts for a tuba player, and one of the most difficult pieces because of the interplay between tuba and bassoon, but it's also just a wonderful, vibrant, exciting end for the concert tonight.
Well, the good thing about the tuba in this concert is that our fantastic tuba player, Dick Clark, will probably not even think about any difficulty in the last piece, because the Zimmerman that is really hard. There is a movement, another thing in the Zimmerman where you think like, how can you? So there is one movement that pairs the following instruments: 2 basses, ruff, 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 2 piccolos, high up, in the middle, a tuba gone wild. I mean, yeah, it's what it is. And then comes, of course, the Russian Easter, which is such a fantastic piece of music that proves again the point that Rimsky Korsakov was one of the greatest instrumentators of the world. And this is the last piece. He had a fairly good year when he wrote this piece. This is the last piece after he wrote the Capriccio Espagnol and Scheherazade, and then he wrote this. So it's okay. And it's funny to learn that Rimsky-Korsakov was a composer who was always so interested in instrumentation that he even, when he was a kid, he went to the opera, real traditional bel canto opera were singers, 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 and all he actually wanted to hear was the instrument. And he discovered that in Lucia di Lammermoor, there is a tam-tam. Nobody else knows that there is a tam-tam in Lucia di Lammermoor, but Rimsky did. And then he became a composer, he became one of the most famous teachers, and he wrote this Russian festival overture, Russian Easter overture, and the Tsar at that time hated it and forbade it, and said, you're not going to play it when I'm present, but you know what? Tsars come and go, the music stays.
Well, they're telling me I have just a couple more minutes. I have one more question, and actually it's for Johannes. You are our artist in residence for the next 3 years. Can you tell us about your beautiful cello and the history behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, well, you will see it's secondhand. It's a 1694 Guarneri. And built in Cremona, next door to Stradivarius. And this instrument found its way to me in the most wonderful way. I had been looking for a sponsor for many years, because obviously you don't buy these kind of instruments with pocket change. And I was approached in a small city in Germany, like tiny city, after a concert. And this guy came up and he said, well, I have a couple of cellos at home. Would you like to come and try them? And I felt really uncomfortable. I mean, that was kind of a weird situation. But I didn't have a cello at the time, so I thought, you know, what can it hurt? And then I came into this living room and there was a Strad, there were 2 Guarneri cellos, there was a Testore, a Galliano cello, and he was like, meh, pick one. So I was like, okay. So I started out with a Testore and then worked my way up to the Guarneri that I've now been playing for about 10 years. And it is a rather smallish cello, but I always compare it to a Bach trumpet. It is small, but it's very piercing in sound. And it does have warmth on the lower registers, but it's not a tank like a Montagnana, for example, something like that. And, you know, we travel together now for 10 years, and she doesn't say much, but she does insist on her vegetarian meal on the plane. Of course, I buy a ticket when I travel with this cello. Because, I mean, such an instrument doesn't belong to me. It also doesn't belong to the owner. It really belongs to the future generations that will want to play this instrument as well. And, you know, they don't grow on trees. Although, I mean, I will say that there are marvelous new makers these days, and I do own a modern cello as well, and I think this is probably really a golden age for modern cello making, modern violin making. A lot of soloists in violin also play modern violins, like Tetzlaff. And
Tetzlaff plays one, yes. I know.
And I mean, you can love it or not, but I think it is testament to the fact that there are amazing makers at the moment, I would say.
Very good. Johannes Moser, again, welcome as our new artist in residence. Carlos Kalmar, our artistic director and conductor, thank you so much. We're in for a wonderful whiplashy concert tonight, so enjoy, and thank you for coming early tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.